My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. I am grateful to have my friend Jacob Cooper return to Destination Unlimited this week and share his new book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. With all great leaders who find connection through life events and signs from the universe, Jacob Cooper demonstrates lessons learned when he encountered a near-death experience as a child climbing a playground ladder. The result is a transformational guide that provides tenets and wisdom on each rung of the ladder, just like Jacob from the Bible. Upon applying these tenets, one can be reminded that they do not have to wait to get to heaven to see the light that is within themselves. The inner light is omnipresent. His website is jacoblcooper.com, and he joins me this week to share his amazing story. Please join me in welcoming back to Destination Unlimited, Jacob Cooper. Welcome back.
Victor, so good to be your return guest again. It's a true honor.
Thank you. And the last time you were on, we were discussing your first book, Life After Breath. For our listeners meeting you for the first time, please share what happened to you when you were 3 and how it shaped your understanding of life and death.
Yeah, at 3 years old, I had a profound near-death experience due to contracting whooping cough, otherwise known as pertussis. And I went to a playground as a very young 3-year-old boy, and I suffocated when I was climbing a ladder onto a slide. And after I suffocated, I was able to let go of my own human breath, and I was able to transcend myself to the breath of eternity. And I crossed over in that moment, and I was able to have a reunion with my spirit guides, my angels, my soul family. I had awareness of previous lives and what I would be doing within this lifetime, and so much more that's well chronicled in Life After Breath, my first book. But it was an experience that forever changed the trajectory of my life, and hopefully people that I interact with as well, that hear not only my NDE, but all these other NDEs that are coming forward as time passes.
I've interviewed many people who have had NDEs, including Evan Alexander, Robert Kopechny, and Anita Morjani. Some share what might be called a life review, or a series of life-changing lessons that they bring back with them. At 3 years of age in this lifetime, there was very little to review, or was there?
Yes. So if those of you who are not familiar, the life review is very common for near-death experiencers. In it's a review of what not only you see and experience in this life, but from others' angle. And so to answer your question, I had a life review of awareness of my impact on other people. But what's interesting about my life review is that it transcended this lifetime. It went beyond this lifetime. I was able to have reviews and awareness of other different lifetimes that I lived, and how, some of them, particularly the last one, was really interconnected and interwoven into this incarnation. So that's something that you don't see all the time with near-death experiencers, is this ability to remember previous lifetimes and have that review. So I was able to have that.
And what was that previous lifetime like?
Well, it was something that I saw in my NDE, and something that I experienced, a lot afterwards. And it came to me evidentially through different intuitives who, read me prior to me going public. But essentially, I talk a little bit more about in Life After Breath, but I died by suicide in that last lifetime. And I just remember the feeling of choosing that decision and how I was, healed, but just also remembering how I felt very cornered and trapped and that there was no hope. And so I see my near-death experience as having a lot of parallels with what happened, in that, last lifetime, in a sense that in my NDE, similarly to that last lifetime, I felt very trapped and suffocated, and it felt as if there was no pathway forward. And then from letting go and surrendering and allowing this beautiful, loving force to carry me forward, I remembered that life is eternal and our pain and suffering, is temporary.
Did that experience shape your life path in terms of your career of helping others?
Absolutely. It gave me a great deal of inspiration to give back what I was given in moments of my near-death experience. You see, when I had my NDE, I felt just completely and utterly lifeless, and I was given this polar experience where I was shown eternal life, and I was had another opportunity of this lifetime. And so, as for me, my goal is to give back what I was given, and not necessarily giving people CPR and resuscitating their bodies, but finding ways for people to have resolve and resilience in their spirit. And so when they're getting stuck and they're feeling stagnant, to find that extra gear to propel them forward. So that's what I try to do at least, but it just reminded me so much that this lifetime is very much about service, and it's about others. And I think of all the angels that I saw within my near-death experience and how they were just there to just, when I saw them, they were just there, just sending beautiful energy and love, around me and to the world at large. And I just remember from that experience that how much, so many people try to find God, but I think we could really find God by thinking and acting like God. And to me, the closest thing of doing that in actualization is by being of service and making this world a better place.
Absolutely. In my interfaith studies, I saw that in virtually every faith and religion, at the foundation is essentially the golden rule, an iteration of the golden rule: do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, love
That's
thy
right.
neighbor as thyself. And that really is the key.
Well, I love those tenets. And it's a shame that some faiths deviate, from that. But yes, there's many paths up the mountain, but ultimately, if it doesn't lead to love, it's not the correct path, I think, So all paths should lead to that. But that's a beautiful way to live.
Is the brain, from what you observed and what you experienced, is the brain a temporary residence for eternal consciousness?
Yes, this is a great question. Within my near-death experience, I mentioned that I suffocated. But what I also remembered was that my body shut down, but not only my body shut down, but I felt my brain literally snap in half. I felt a large crack in my brain due to the deprivation of oxygen. And so once my brain like snapped in half and was deprived of oxygen is when God and the spirit realm came in. It's like that saying, when my brain cracked open, that's when God came in. Well, that happened to me literally. So I could tell you as clear as crystal that the brain does not produce a life or consciousness. It just is a filter of it. And near-death experience researchers will tell you the same exact statement as I am. Where you could have people who are having these NDEs and have very little to no, neuro movement, but they're able to have these profound awareness and recollection. And so, where is this? And this really separates the mind and the brain, which, at the time, material, kind of material science and studies, hard material studies, would say that the brain is physical and all things are physical, so it produces the mind. But NDEs are able to say that there's something beyond this physical, and that the mind goes beyond the brain.
Where do you say that our consciousness resides?
Good question, Victor. I I would say that we have an opportunity to deepen consciousness, that it's not necessarily set, but ultimately it's at the depths of our being. So I think a lot of people have reality in life creating their consciousness or creating their minds. But if we're really connected, we could have our own consciousness creating our worlds. I'll say that again. A lot of people have, life creating their minds. But really, if we're really tuned into our own consciousness, we could create our own life in our own worlds with how we process, interpret situations. But I would say it's at the very depths of our own inner being is where true consciousness is. But a lot of people are, more closer to the surface in the depths of the waters. But people are starting to wake up and to change day by day.
Bringing together your initial experience and what you've learned through life and working with others, how would you define our pure essence, the soul?
That's a great question. I often reference Wayne Dyer, and if you listen to Wayne Dyer, Dr. Wayne Dyer, he would often, when he would present, he would say, "You ever see an orange? And if you squeeze an orange out, you get orange juice. So what happens if you squeeze yourself out? What's left?" And so our job isn't there, our house isn't there, our finance, none of those things are left. All that's left is the love that we have in us and the love that we experience and the relationships that we build. So I think to me, our depth is love. That is who we are. That's what we're forever connected to. But not just love, because I know in Greek philosophies they talk about different forms of love, but to me, unconditional love, which is not loving things by what they're doing or minute to minute transactional viewpoints of things, but to love things beyond the surface and to love things for not what we do, but rather for who we are deep down.
That's a beautiful definition. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Is that soul infinite?
Yes, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't. And many other near-death experiencers, um, it is infinite. It goes beyond this reality. I say there's a you beyond the you as you see yourself, and there is a world beyond the world as you see it. And it's hard because a lot of us are still stuck in our, linear left brain minds. So we could only understand reality from the vantage point of what we're seeing it. So I think really to understand this, you have to get into a deeper layer of yourself and of the I view. But when you're able to look at things through a deeper lens, you could have more understanding of this, and it could transform to a belief into a direct experience more times than not. Is what I would say.
And most of the Abrahamic religions and some other religions will say that the source of the soul is God, the divine. What have you found about the source of the soul?
Yeah, I mean, all things emanate from that source, and what you want to call that, it's limiting. I don't think there's a word to describe that. And when I encountered, the word that we use, in our society at least is God, but to me it goes so much more beyond that. It's just it's just kind of like the vortex of where all things in life emanate from and forever connected to. Um, so there the innermost part of us, I think, and I know actually, is an aspect of the divine, is that part. And so, I think if you want to talk the Hebrew tradition, which I'm from, and I think you practice as well, is that the word for spirit is in Hebrew is ruach, which means the wind of God. And so it could be the breath of God, the wind of God. And so I could attest that when I had my NDE, I was out of my own breath and I was able to be saved by the breath and the wind of God, hence my title, Life After Breath. So this breath of eternity, our essence, forever connects us to the divine. We're an infinite spiritual divine being having these human journeys.
It's interesting that many other cultures and religions use that same analogy of breath for the essence
Right.
of life or soul. You have prana in Sanskrit, in Hindu practice. You have pneuma in the Greek language, and many others use that same correspondence between breath and the essence, the soul.
Yeah, I mean, some things have truths, and when you are tapping into this, it's universal, and it's great to see some of the different interpretations, but the similar meaning that no matter if we're here and in Australia, we're tapping into the same thing. It's really fascinating.
Congratulations on your brand new book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. That is really wonderful. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. It didn't come from a likely candidate to preface. When I was a community college student, I wasn't even allowed to take accredited English classes or writing classes. I was put in the lowest possible reading and writing class, remedial courses in my first semester. But by taking those classes, I built myself up as a writer. And I still didn't have confidence in myself, but I had an aunt of mine who was very into metaphysics. And she looked at one of my writings and she said, "You have a really big gift of expression." And she's a Virgo. And if you get a compliments by Virgo, they're genuine and they're real and authentic. But she was very intellectual. And she's my Aunt Seal, who I mentioned in my first book. And so that belief allowed me to just remember who I was. So it just shows you the power of belief. You could walk around, many people, we just walk around with such limiting beliefs about ourselves that those govern our lives and limits. We're limited by our own perceptions that we have. And then we're able to tear those down and open us up to different outlooks. Infinite possibilities could exist. So it just really dawned on me the power of belief, where if whatever you think, you're right, if you can or cannot do something. But I really credit the spirit realm for really working through this book. When you surrender, much like the near-death experience or any other walk in life, infinite possibilities are there. You don't have to do it all alone. You can kind of be like a solar panel, regenerating your own energy, regenerating energy.
Now, your inspiration for the wisdom of Jacob's ladder was your own experience climbing a ladder, wasn't it?
There's an immense amount of symbology within my NDE, but yes, the ladder is one of it. And I think in a way, your name could speak to who you could be, your essence in a way. And certainly that was the inspiration for the title of my book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, because, biblical Jacob was running after his brother Esau in Genesis, I believe, and he had a dream of angels going up and down the ladder. And so it's kind of like he had his own NDE where he was fleeting for his own life, and he was able to remember eternity and the different rungs of life and how we were forever connected to God in the spirit realm, from those depths of darkness. And that's a similar format for so many other ascended masters, where you look at the Buddha, Jesus, they all, even contemporary, people like Eckhart Tolle or Neil Donald Walsh, they have this dark night of the soul. It doesn't not necessarily an NDE, but they're able to find the light in the darkest of places. But yeah, that was the inspiration behind the title. It was just the symmetry of my experience in Jacob's from the Bible.
And that is in Genesis chapter 28. And for those who are not familiar with it, give us a little more description of what happened to the patriarch Jacob.
Yeah, he was fleeing from his brother Esau, and I think a lot of it had to do with the covenant with their brother Isaac, that they both wanted, a favorable covenant. And, Jacob and Esau were very kind of different. It's interpretive. Esau was more of kind of like a hunting and gathering type, but Jacob was more of a pious, kind of learned person, although at times he could be sneaky. Um, so those were the two of Isaac's, sons, but they were very different. One was more kind of blue collar and stuff like that. Jacob was more, very into spirituality and learning and really wanting to get close to God. But his brother was chasing him for his life, for the covenant, I believe, and he, slept in a place which is now known as Beth El, which is in Israel, which translates into the house of God, which is a place that I've been to a couple times in Israel. But he had a dream while sleeping on rocks that he set up of angels going up and down the ladder. And they gave him different messages and different interpretations about, the Israelites and the Jews and descendants and stuff like that, from my understanding. I'm certainly no theologian, but that's the little that I know, that's kind of some of the pieces that I know. And a random fact is that Jacob actually means grabbed by the heel, because I do believe when their brother Rebekah was giving birth, Jacob grabbed his brother's heel when they were being born. So very interesting name. But later in life, Jacob transformed into Israel when he, I guess, wrestled with the and became
Actually,
Israel
the
or
yeah,
something like that.
actually what happens is during the dream of the ladder, he attempted to ascend the ladder and he wrestled with an angel who was
Right.
trying to prevent him from ascending the ladder. And the translation of Israel is wrestles with God, which is the name he was given
Wow.
after that experience. In your opinion, don't most humans wrestle with God? And aren't we all, in essence, Israel?
That's something universal. We all have, realities at hand that we could ascribe to. Reality of suffering, recognizing that it's a part of the human experience. But, through suffering, through that pathway, we could find a greater truth and a greater beauty beyond the surface. And, being Jewish, there's no such thing as synchronicities, but I didn't even plan this, but my book came out actually on Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Oh,
It was a week ago on Friday. And I know I look at a family portrait, half of my family was, lost their lives in the Holocaust. But the reason why I'm saying that is it, it could show you a lot about life because I know, you know, just early stages, in the Holocaust, they tried to ban or burn any book that was written by a Jew or anything that went against the regime, including Albert Einstein's book. And so, it just shows you that, here I am less than a century away from that, and I'm able to write books again, and Jews are able to write books and have an influence in the world. And so, even if the world tries to take away your freedom, your story, we could still, at some point, write it, and consciousness survives, and our story survives. And a Holocaust survivor, I think his name is Elie Wiesel, once said that God created us because God loves stories.
mm.
And so, even though they tried to take away our creativity, our stories, we still, to this day, tell our stories and celebrate the divine.
And telling stories in every tradition is how we preserve heritage and keep it going from generation to generation.
That's right. That's right. But you can't allow the story to tell your story. You have to have the ultimate freedom of interpreting it and in every moment trying to find a different pathway to see it in the highest and greatest good.
Absolutely. My guest is Jacob Cooper, his new book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Jacob, please tell our listeners where they can get the book and find out more about you.
The book is available on Amazon right now in paperback and Kindle, and they could find me by contacting me through my website. It's www.jacoblcooper.com. That's www.jacoblcooper.com.
And we'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
We've all felt left out. And for people who move to this country, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Jacob Cooper. His new book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Jacob, you share that all humans are sacred beings, and that last word is the most important. Rather than doing, we are being. Please explain.
Yeah, well, I think in life, there's two different types of perspectives or identities that we could have. I think a lot of people, they have a sense of self-perception based on what they're doing. So, the job could define us, the house could define us. What we're doing moment to moment could be how we define ourselves. Um, but I think the issue is that's a very unstable and satisfactory sense of self and identity. And, what do we do when, whatever we're doing is having a bad day or isn't going well? And so doing is never unconditional. love and unconditional acceptance. Our own being goes beyond our doing, so in a sense, who we are, our essence, our inner being goes beyond that. And so we don't call ourselves human doings, we call ourselves human beings. So being is really our essence, our presence in life, our beauty, our grace, our wisdom, and all the things deep inside of us that we could cultivate. So the idea is in the things that we do, we want to be. We want to be aware. We want to be present. We want to be fully engaged with compassion, empathy, and guidance in all that we do. And this is a key to living as a spiritual being during this human experience.
And as my spiritual teacher used to share, there should be an 11th commandment: thou shalt have purpose, and being is that purpose.
Yeah, yeah. I was watching this movie called Soul, which is a Disney Pixar movie. And for those viewers who haven't seen it, do check it out. When I saw it, I didn't think much of it, but because it was a Pixar movie. But then I saw it and how I don't want to give the movie away, but the movie is basically about a near-death experience, and they consulted with a lot of people in the metaphysical industry. But that particular movie has such a profound message of, someone who was chasing and wasn't find satisfaction, and then they're able to find satisfaction, within life itself and the things that we view as small as big, and that really coincides with Carl Jung, I believe. He talks about the morning of life and the afternoon of life, where the morning is about the chase, the pursuit, and having all the titles and getting ahead, and the afternoon is about kind of sitting back and resting and being mindful and present. And so we don't have to retire to get to that age. We could be a lot more productive, actually, by being in that place of ease and grace, and presence in life.
There's a wonderful song that was written by David Pomerantz in 1975 that I first heard while attending the New Seminary in the mid-1990s. The lyric says in part, "It's in every one of us to be wise. Find your heart, open up both your eyes. We can all know everything without ever knowing why. It's in every one of us by and by." You echo this and share that rather than something external that we have to see and learn, wisdom is truly within us. For those who have forgotten, how may we reconnect and experience that wisdom?
I think the first step is to be empowered, because the more of a sense of self that you have, the more that you could be able to be open to different possibilities, what you see reality as. I think from a very young age, a lot of people are disempowered. They throw away this wisdom and and clarity that they have from the other side, and are almost kind of programmed this human condition that focuses on outside information and regurgitation versus imagination and innovation. And so I think for people, it's finding ways to really see themselves as the source of life in wisdom and understanding versus the external world as always the dependent source. And so, it goes back to that saying, like, don't allow the world to create your mind, but you have to allow your beautiful mind to create your world. But from an early age, we're taught we're almost these empty blank canvases that need imprints from the external world. So when you really tap in, it starts with empowerment. It starts with believing that you're more than a body, believing that there are deeper gears. And once you familiarize yourself with those gears, it's a beautiful place to live your life. You just remember, like, wow, I had this accessible all the times and has a little bit of cobwebs on it, but then you start getting used to it, and it's a beautiful gear to live in when you're coming from that deep place within, and that shift could happen in your life where you just kind of go from the rat race of this world to a place of beauty and ease. And it's just funny how we could live on the same planet and it could feel like a totally different one when you have, a different perspective.
It's interesting. In my late 30s and early 40s, I had an awakening. And part of that awakening was that me being right is worthless if it makes someone else wrong.
It's an interesting perspective. I mean, I think in our world, like our world has fallen in love with being right, you know, But I always say two things could be true at the same time. I mean, everyone and their own level has their own truths, and the truths evolve within time. But I think we want to be right on more of a macro basis and to do right by each other, not being right over one another. We don't need to prove points or need to get ahead of someone to get far. But I think our journey is only successful as each person around us. And so it's better to strive to harmony as a right way to live than to focus on being right about things and having an exact way of living. But yes, I think two truths could exist at the same time. It doesn't always have to be one way.
As long as what I project doesn't hurt or make someone else feel bad. That's the whole
That's
idea behind it.
that's right. So I think for a lot of people who do this stuff, they give up on themselves because within this life, there's a spiritual mindset, but then there's also the human experience and going through that, and the fact that no one's immunized from, being perfect or not having these quote unquote mistakes or getting frustrated, and that's all a part of being human. And so you could have these greater ideals while also having these human feelings and emotions too, and they both could be a part of your life.
And the other aspect of this is to give the gift of truly listening and hearing one another without the need to interject or impose our own opinions and thoughts when someone's trying to share their feelings.
Oh my God, if only we could do that. I mean, that's the root of empathy is active empathic listening. And I view it as understanding, which I once had a teacher in college that she would use her hand and she'd say, understanding is putting yourself under that person of where they're standing. I
Yeah.
love that play on words. It's true. And that, Victor, is the God lens. You see, I think a lot of people think of God as like this Judge Judy type or the Supreme Court judge, whatever, but it's not the case. God is not our parents or a principal. God is the eternal energy of unconditional love. And so I believe God in the spirit realm does not look down at us, but looks up at us with a much different lens than we probably see ourselves as. And it's an unlimited lens because, like I said before, we go along with this human identities, but we miss really how beautiful we are, and there's a divine spark in each and every one of us. And the more that we're able to remember that, the more that we're able to not necessarily need God, but we become it, we embody it, that becomes integrated in our phyla.
You share in the wisdom of Jacob's ladder that we do not have to wait until we pass to feel joy and that connection with God, but rather we can feel it while we are alive. How may we embrace that connection?
Well, well, I think a lot of people, have to be aware of where they're facing in life and where they think truths are. Like I said before, we've been very disempowered to think that our value and truths are found in out external stuff, and they could be found there. But I think an empowered life is recognizing that all your answers and truths could be found from a deep inner place within. So instead of traveling and sojourning thousands of miles away, in which you could, you simply could just open up a doorway to your inner being and find an immense amount of beauty. But you have to look at it through open-endedness and through the eyes of a child and through presence, not judgment or just kind of like a regurgitated sense of self that we carry over. It's got to be with curiosity. And curiosity, there's infinite things that you could find. But certainly I found this in my NDE that, all these things are always deep inside of us. We just forget it and we hold on to a sense of reality and we push our true reality away. You know, we just kind of
How
bury it deep within. But to answer your question in more of a succinct way, I would say meditation, and as cliche as it is, I say meditation is getting intimate with eternity. It's getting intimate with God. And the deeper you're able to do it, the more you recognize that there is a you beyond the thought. There is a you beyond this world. There is a you beyond the you. And, you just know that once the body goes, you will carry, this quantum of, beautiful awareness with you that's goes beyond the body and the brain.
how may that sacred connection help us to overcome fear and loneliness?
Well, I think when we meditate, and those when who experience this, you just connect to this deep reservoir of love and warmth. And many times when you connect, you could find a lot of your superpowers, which are really inside of you. And so I think sometimes when people feel depleted by, you know, factors in life that could contribute to loneliness, or just feeling isolated with people around them, they could connect to a place within. And I think it's almost kind of like recharging ourselves because we're all just visitors here on this life, but this will really help out for people who might feel a sense of homesickness. So a lot of people will charge their cell phones, but we have to also charge our soul phones. And I think meditation is a great way to get that power back and to feel our essence, which is warmth and a sense of knowing that we're not here alone, that there's an immense amount of beauty and love that is always around us, and to develop a keen awareness of that in our everyday life.
I love that. If you charge your cell phone, don't forget to charge your soul phone. That's wonderful.
Well, the cell phone is a term actually developed by my new friend, Dr. Gary Schwartz.
Mm.
If you know Dr. Q endorsed my book as well. He's just an incredible, influential piece, of consciousness, and he is just very pioneering, and he utilizes his work, at the University of Arizona, and he had a whole program, in which, before this was popular, in the 90s, in which he tested, evidential mediums in a scientific kind of way. So he's a incredible pioneer and really grounds this stuff.
There is a lovely fable that says when we are born, an angel comes and presses in our upper lip saying, "Shh, don't tell what you know." This results in the dimple in the top lip and amnesia of where we came from and who we are. Why do you think so many have this amnesia and sense of separation from the divine?
There's a plethora of reasons, and it's subjective too. But I think, it has to do with each individual's path. I mean, sometimes I say, like, if we were meant to know everything, then what would be the point of having this human experience? But if we could have just a little bit, like a seed of mustard moves mountains, all that stuff, if we could have like a little bit of awareness, that could create such a shift in our life. So it doesn't mean that we have to be over there more than here, because that wouldn't be the point of this life. But we are able to open ourselves up more than what we know today. So in that sense, like I said before, you're able to remember that, as Jesus would say, the kingdom of heaven doesn't lie outside of myself, it lies within. And, who in a way better knew the kingdom of heaven than Jesus in many ways. So I think for ourselves, we have to remind ourselves that's within all of us, that connection to the other side is within each and every one of us. So yes, there's a deal of amnesia with most people. I think older souls and people with higher callings might drink a little bit less from those waters, as Plato would say. But that amnesia is there with everyone, because we are here to have a human experience as spiritual beings.
What is your understanding of what we know as angels and other spiritual guides?
I think each and every one of us has spirit guides and angels around them, but I think a lot of people don't recognize it, or don't even know how much they interact with them on a daily basis. And so, our awareness, our intuition, it is really assisted by those on the other side. So for instance, not making that turn on the highway or the road, I'm sorry, or the road, and just that little voice telling us. So we think that we're thinking all day, but a lot of times, intuition, and messages come through within thoughts within our life. So whether we recognize it or not, we have our greater angels always communicating with us. Now, the ability to hear is developed, and the ability to choose what we want to follow is also free will as well. But they're always watching and always talking to us. We just have to listen.
Absolutely. I think I shared with you the last time a couple of examples of this, but the most recent one was a couple of years ago. Was driving on the local highway with my wife and my son We were in the extreme left-hand lane. It was going at the speed limit, which is 50 miles an hour. And traffic was heavy, but it was moving nicely. And I heard a voice in my head saying, "Get out of this lane now." And having learned to listen to that voice, I moved from the left lane to the center lane. Within 5 seconds, there was a multi-car collision in the left lane, and we would have been smack dab in the middle of it. And had I not listened.
Wow. That's like a spiritual Waze on steroids,
Yeah.
right? The GPS of, literally in our car of our life, like guiding us. And, I think it really is a lot of trust. So many times we, kind of trust in our own fears over those messages that we have. And I think really it's trusting faith and wisdom and intuition over our fears.
Absolutely. My guest is Jacob Cooper. His new book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. We'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes radio network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Hey, Dad, your prescription will be ready in just a minute. Hey, Dad, your laundry will be ready in just a minute. Dad, your lunch will be ready in just a minute.
Hey, honey, why don't you take a minute? When you help care for a loved one, you give them as much time as you can. But it's just as important to take time for yourself. AARP can help. Find free care guides to support you and your loved one at aarp.org/caregiving. That's aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
They are our love bugs and companions. They are our pets, our family, and they make life better. When we face unexpected challenges, so do our pets. That's why we're on a mission to support people and their pets. Whether donating a bag of kibble, sharing an Instagram post of a lost cat, or welcoming a foster pet into your home, every bit of kindness counts. Visit petsandpeopletogether.org to learn how to be a helper in your community. Brought to you by Maddie's Fund, the Humane Society of the United States, and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited. My guest this week, my dear friend and brother, Jacob Cooper. Jacob, one of the greatest lessons I received from my spiritual teacher at the new seminary was that everything is unfolding in divine order, that we may not understand what is going on, we may be troubled by it, but that ultimately there is a higher purpose to everything if we view it with spiritual eyes. Do you agree with this?
Yes, and you know who also agrees with that statement is Albert Einstein. I know we mentioned him earlier on, but he said something along the lines, and I'm paraphrasing, but the most significant viewpoint that we could have is a universe ambivalent, loving, or a place that is working against us. And so how we interpret life and the universe and God will allow us to transcend the events that happen in a place. So, things may happen to us that's not our fault, but we could trust, in an order behind those things and a lack of randomness, despite all the suffering that may be on the surface.
How do you define your ladder?
It's a good question. I think for me and for all of us, the ladder is a place that, at least in this lifetime, connects us to the heavens and on the earth plane, in the sense that the heavens isn't far away, but it's at each rung, and we're connected to the hereafter, in a sense that we are born, we have these human lives, but the afterlife is always around us, and something that we're always connected to. And so each incarnation that we have, we could even ascend higher and higher on that ladder if we're able to remember and integrate who we are and where we come from. That will allow us to really, evolve as beings. The more recollection that we have and the more integration of that, the more we become it, and the more we actualize and become our true, divine selves.
And do we have to wrestle with angels in the way Jacob did?
That's one way to do it, but hopefully, I always joke when people hear my near-death experience, they they want to have self-induced near-death experience to have enlightenment. And I said, that was something that was charted. It was really planned to be. Something as strong as that was certainly in my life planning and charting. But I would say is you don't have to suffocate to have awareness. You could, but isn't it much easier if you don't have to go through all that trauma and difficulty? So we could have great enlightenment without those dark moments, but it shows you that light could be found within light itself, or light could be found in the darkest of places. Either way, all things are light.
Absolutely. So many have lost loved ones since the advent of COVID and for other reasons. What have your experiences taught you about grief?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up COVID because grief is one thing, but COVID added a lot to complicated grief, in a sense that many couldn't be with their loved ones or by their bedside, or it just felt like the connection and that degree of closure wasn't possible, and it was just so very difficult, and it just became just like this big trauma, and something that was so painful for people is just beyond words, and how quickly these lives were transitioned. But I've learned that grief is something that I certainly embrace on a personal and professional basis. Having my near-death experience and working as a therapist, puts me in a unique position to really look at grief through, a different perspective. But what I'll say is our society poses a lot of difficulties when it comes to mental health, particularly with grief. In a sense, at least in the Western world, we're always trying to move ahead. We're always trying to move on to the next thing. Everything is about trendiness, and so we do that with life itself. Something bad, a loss happens. It's like, all right, you mourn for a day or two. Obviously, in the Jewish tradition, we have the Shiva, but then after that, we just push those feelings away many times, and we just want to move on. But grief isn't like that. Grief, as David Kessler, if you're familiar with David, he works with the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation, will tell you that there is a river of grief, in a sense that this river of grief will take you where you need to go. It's not always a pleasant or an easy journey, but as David discusses, this river of grief has a possibility to transcend suffering and pain, into meaning and love. And so I think when you're able to process it and allow it to unfold naturally, it's there, but it's something hardwired in us to grieve. You think about it as human beings. I mean, how many ancestors have came and gone before we were born here? So it's rooted in us, but we just must allow it to take its form and to allow the movement to occur of grief.
Your experiences also opened you on an intuitive level. You share that we can all connect with our superpowers. How may we do this?
I think really our ability to see things and to evolve and to see things through a broader perspective is largely based on how we see ourselves. When we have a small sense of self, we often limit ourselves with what we could see and who we could be. But then if we remind ourselves that we are these infinite beings who are capable of transcending death and have, this beautiful depth of wisdom bestowed in each and every one of us, that really vantage point of belief within ourselves could change our whole lives. So to connect to our loved ones, it's really sometimes allowing ourselves to pay attention, because our loved ones are constantly trying to tell us messages or giving us signs. And when you pay attention, these things can never be coincidences. They're quite powerful super synchronicities that could happen if you really pay attention. So I think the big thing is to be mindful and to listen, to pay attention, to not try to force a loved one to come as we want them to, but to just allow them um, to come in the way that they want to present themselves. It's kind of like you feel someone with a gentle tap on your shoulder that's very gentle and very easy. Yeah, that to me is kind of like the presence of those on their side. It's like a doorway that opens very softly, and a soft wind is there. It's not something that you muscle to get or trying to force. I think a lot of people try to do that. The spirit realm is very gentle and very ease and very much of joy and lightness. It's a higher vibration. It's not a density.
My mother passed in January of 2020, and
My condolences.
thank you. And since that time, whenever I've had a decision to make or was having a difficulty a challenge that I was facing, I'd have this sense, this feeling of someone very gently rubbing the back of my head. And I know it was my mother when she was doing that, comforting me.
Wow. That's beautiful because yes, they will they will come to us in ways that they want to present themselves as. It's sometimes it's like charades, but sometimes we can really feel it almost physically that and for mom, they see us still as their child, and they'll come through with that still comforting way, and that's beautiful. And we're able to have that. It's just a part of us just recognizes that the body did not create this relationship, and the body isn't limiting of this relationship, that it goes so much more than just this body in this lifetime.
Absolutely. Our world seems to long for love and unity. Is this achievable?
Yes, but it starts with one light at a time. I think people want to be able to not only have their own light lit, but to be able to light others. Within at least our kind of way of thinking, we hear the term oneness thrown out there all the time. But oneness isn't singular in its vernacular or its meaning. It's applicable, and it's a very versatile way to live by. But to me, oneness, much like my near-death experience, is kind of like being in a playground, like I experienced, where we're all children in God's playgrounds. Here are our brothers and sisters keepers to look out for us. And so in our world, that's very diametrically oppositional. We're taught, we have to put people down to get ahead. And, there's a sense of individual. But when the individual has a consciousness connected to the collective and they're working intertwined, you're working on yourself, but you're also aware of this macro connection. And then you're coming from a place of giving, because I believe there's two different types of ways to live. There's takers and givers. And so if we're coming from a place of giving, we recognize, that really to me is the closest thing to our life's purpose, is that we give over a greater light than when we came here, and that we have a ripple effect on those that we impact in a positive way.
What would you like your readers to take away from Climbing Jacob's Ladder?
I would like for them to have a feeling of remembrance. I say near-death experience, and people who listen to near-death experience, they're there because there's something familiar, something that might be buried deep within that they might have forgotten about. And so they're able to remember some of this stuff, but they're also, within the book, there's very practical ways to really utilize how to act and think and look at the world through this divine lens, so that we don't have to hold our breath to get to heaven, but through connection to our own being, we can embody it, we could live it, and we could bask it in it. And I think that's the beauty of near-death experiences, is that this doorway through these shakeups that happen to us in our biophysiological chemistry with NDEs, we remember that there's a part of us that is deep within us that's forever connected, to the other side. It's not a destination, but a place deep within.
My guest, my friend, and my brother, Jacob Cooper. Jacob, please tell our listeners one more time where they can get your books and find out more about you and your wonderful work.
My two books, Life After Breath and The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, are both available through Amazon, through paperback, as well as digital through Kindle. And you could also look at my website at jacoblcooper.com. And there you could also find my different social media links to my professional pages. And each day I get quiet and I try to give over wisdom. And I say wisdom and inspiration is the oxygen of our times, is what we need to really navigate our world and live by. And hopefully that could create a ripple effect in others who tune into my pages.
Amen, brother. Amen. Thank you, Jacob, so much for joining us. For friends and listeners, Jacob had a cold, and you may have heard him cough a little bit during the course of the show.
it was a cough, but it's just like I was talking to Victor in the break. It's kind of like we're talking about my near-death experience, and it wasn't a trauma response with my coughing, but it's synchronistic where talking about the stuff and I'm coughing, but I survived that, and survive what I'm going through too, and we all will. Love truly knows no death.
Absolutely. Jake, thank you so much for joining us. I'm truly grateful to you for the sharing.
Victor, an honor as always. Keep in touch, my brother, and keep up the faith.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the voice. Fuhrman, have a wonderful week.